Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Davison, Professor of Philosophy and Interim Dean at the Caudle College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at Morehead State University. Today, our Caudle conversation is about media and advertising and money. And joining me today is Dr. Morgan Getchell, Professor of Communication, and Steve Middleton, Instructor of Communication, both from Morehead State University. We're going to talk about some of the forces that shape media and its production and how that should alert us in the ways that we consume these sources of media. I think, Dr. Getchell, you're going to start us off today.
Yes, I am, and I'm going to begin today's discussion by talking about how various media outlets make money. So if we look at traditional or legacy media and start with print journalism, newspapers primarily make their money through subscriptions. People pay a fee to have a monthly, weekly, daily edition of the paper delivered to them. And then they also make money through paid advertisements. Organizations pay a flat fee to have a certain sized ad in a certain section in edition of the paper. If we look at broadcast television and radio, it's also paid advertisements. Organizations pay a fee for a 15, 30-second spot during a certain time slot on a certain station. Now, as we have cable television, that's a combination. They also do paid advertisements, but because cable is a paid service that you pay a subscription fee for, the networks also get a small percentage of the subscription fees that people pay. Then, of course, we have the internet, and that has changed everything. So obviously, the print media has shifted to online publishing, but it's still kind of the same structure. You will come up against a paywall if you try and access online versions of articles from sites like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, because they still rely on that subscription method as a primary income source. So you might get away with 1 or 2 articles for free, but then you'll get that pop-up that says, "Thank you for your interest. To keep reading, please subscribe, pay, etc., etc." But we also, with the internet, have the birth of the weblog, or blog as it is commonly known. These are very popular sites that everyone accesses pretty regularly: Huffington Post, Vox, Politico, TechCrunch, Gawker before it got taken down by Hulk Hogan, etc. And what sets these sites apart is that, unlike online New York Times, you will never come up against a paywall. All of the content on these sites is free. And so how does that happen? How can you have a working business model that doesn't charge for its product? Online advertising. But unlike the flat fee model that legacy media use, where it's just X amount for this particular spot, these online ads work on a cost per impression or cost per click model. So let's say an advertiser puts a banner ad on a Huffington Post page, and 100,000 people open that page and scroll past it. The advertiser will pay based on those 100,000 views. If it's a click model, then of course it requires the person to actually click a link, click an image, etc., and the advertiser will pay based on the number of people who click it. So obviously in this model, our attention and our clicks equal money. So it behooves these sites to create content, to create ads that will continue to draw us in and bring us back daily, sometimes multiple times a day, which is why you will see constantly refreshed home pages. You will see constantly refreshed social media feeds with links linking us back to these pages, and annoyingly, a rise in what we've come to refer to as clickbait headlines. So things like what your doctor doesn't want you to know about weight loss, and what really happens when you eat 5 avocados a day, and crazy things like that, that people are like, well, now I need to know. And once they click on it, it doesn't matter to the content producer or the advertiser if you get anything worthwhile out of it, because they've already got what they want, which is your click, your view, your impression. Because again, in this model, these impressions and views equal money. The more people you have coming to your site, the more you can charge advertisers. So, as the saying goes, if the product is free, chances are you are the product, because it's kind of a vicious cycle. On one side of the coin, we are the consumers, and these sites are catering to us. They want to create content that will bring us in, keep us clicking and viewing. But once we actually get to the site, the coin flips, and on the other side, we become the product. These sites use various tools that Steve is going to talk about, like algorithms and cookies, to track our behavior, track our location, get all this information about us that they then aggregate with thousands of other user data and sell to third parties who use it to figure out how to create more engaging content, more engaging ads to keep us coming back. So it really is a vicious cycle where we are feeding the beast, but the beast is also feeding us exactly what we tell it we want. So it's really an interesting model that we've created with this cost per click and cost per impression advertising structure, because it really has decreased the need for accuracy and increased the need for drawing people in and being first rather than being right when it comes to getting the scoop and drawing people in. So my spiel.
Thank you. That is super interesting. So I suppose over time with experience, people get better and better at figuring out what's going to hold our attention and draw us in. And it becomes more and more irresistible to feed the beast. Steve, why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts of this about this?
Well, in the history, going all the way back to the earliest forms of social media as we know it, I don't know if anyone could have predicted the power that social media would have on our society here in 2021. Facebook, somewhere around 4 billion users. And this is where we get all of our information now, whether it's entertainment or news, pseudoscience, and the power of all of these messages coming at us at once. Interesting, all the things Morgan said, the evolution of media and advertising and cost, so much has changed so quickly from about 2008, 2009 until now. All those traditional models have flipped. And I always try to tell students, view social media in the United States as pure capitalism. And it's pay per click, it's micro-targeted ads, it's people searching out. And one of the things that happened in previous presidential elections was they took all of that data from the clicking and from the promoted ads, and they were micro-targeting very specific regions in the United States and very specific audiences with keywords and interests and age ranges. But the thing I find most fascinating is the cost of all of this. How much does this cost? And then from the production side, you need to think about how much should I spend on this and how many people can see this? So it's a weird double-edged sword. I mean, the more followers, more interactions you have, larger the audience is going to see your promoted messages. And for a very small price on Facebook, for about $100, you can reach an audience of 10,000 people over about a week. And that's just the base reach. So if those 10,000 people that see it interact, that could possibly be 100,000 in just a few days. And 100,000, if they interact, that could be 500,000, and it just exponentially increases. So, on one side, capitalism, but on the other side, the apps, Facebook in particular, is governing how many people can see your content unless you pay. And so, just like old-fashioned holding back power on an engine, if you pay them more money, more people are going to see your message. So that's created this need for more interesting headlines, more interesting visuals, more interesting graphics to get people to click. And that could be as simple as what Morgan was saying about health. And I've seen those ads about drinking apple cider vinegar, which I don't think that would be good in large quantities. But I've also seen as small as people here in Lexington, Kentucky area, and Huntington, West Virginia area, who are buying into ads, trying just to grab your attention, whether that's some form of media or music or video. I have personally boosted ads for the string band I play with and documentaries I've produced, hoping you would reach a larger audience. But it's amazing to me how small the cost is and how far the cost can go, how quickly you can reach a large audience. And sort of the darker side to this is, if you are a current business, say Morehead State University, you have to use this type of advertising today. Those traditional models that Morgan said are all out the window.
When you describe this as pure capitalism, that's really interesting. And what you're suggesting there is that the money is sort of driving the whole process, and the way that it evolves and shapes depends on the economic success of the approach that's taken. I remember, this is going to date me a little bit, but there was there were more legal restrictions on on how news was delivered on networks. And I remember a controversy, this will really date me, when there was a new newspaper introduced, the national one called USA Today. U.S. News and World Report, right? And the controversy was that it seemed so fluffy compared to the rest of the newspapers. The journalism was so popular, designed to be appealing. There were color photographs on the front page, and lots of things that we thought were not really news. And now, of course, those concerns are so outdated. And that was sort of a step in the direction of what you're describing, right? So the content has been tailored to be more and more irresistible, if you will. When you say pure capitalism, that's a really interesting phrase here. If money is driving this process and the financial impact is sort of the key piece of the evolution, does that have an effect on how reliable the information is? It seems like if you're trying to maximize the profit of this approach, you're going to be less inclined to be worried about whether it's accurate, maybe more inclined to run with a story before you can verify it. Do we see that happening too?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, in today's model, it's better to be first than to be right. And the standards to which actual journalistic outlets like the New York Times are held to are very different than what something like BuzzFeed is going to be held to. And also pre the internet, if you needed to publish a correction, you had to wait 24 hours potentially until the next edition came out. With online publishing, if you get something wrong, you can just go in on the back end and quick update. But the problem with that is how many times was it shared and viewed in its original incorrect form? And is there any way, spoiler alert, no, to guarantee that that original audience who read the incorrect version is going to read your corrected version? Probably not. And yeah, again, when you have a staff of trained journalists on, a site like the New York Times versus these untrained staff writers who are often paid, they don't really get a salary. They get paid based on a lot of times how many clicks their articles generate. They're stringers. They get, next to nothing to crank out, 12 to 15 pieces a day for various sites. The integrity of the content definitely suffers.
Oh yeah, and in the more sinister side of it in the last year and a half is promoted stories that are leading to clicks have tended to focus on issues with public health, and that's extremely dangerous. Uh, you know, Facebook in particular has created a realm now to report false information, but that information, because it was promoted, was released to begin with. And a lot of these entities are creating stories just to get the ad revenue. And certain demographics of people, especially baby boomer generation, are very susceptible to this information. Where I don't think a lot of I talk with current students all the time about this, and you can tell it says promoted at the bottom, or you can clearly tell it's clickbait. But there's a large portion of this population in this country now that falls victim to this type of advertising that's based upon ad revenue.
And I think that coincides, it's kind of been a perfect storm of, the increase in these types of sites and this promoted content that's clearly false, with also rhetoric from certain political figures and political parties about don't trust the media, the mainstream media is lying to you. They've got an agenda. If you want the real news, if you want the raw, unfiltered stuff, come to realnewsforreal.com or something like that. So it's been an unfortunate kind of coinciding of these two forces of the dark side of what can be published on the internet, with the rhetoric coming from certain figures about not trusting the media.
Morgan, I think in your original presentation, you said something about the cycle and how it's based on sort of what we want to hear. And when you mention these areas like public health or elections or important national conversations, say about racial justice, if the information people get is driven by their own initial preferences anyway, if they're only hearing what they want to hear, and if this is the way people get their information, if this is what we call news now, does that mean people are sort of isolated or protected from getting the information that they really need to get, in the sense that they're only getting what they already agree with, and nothing is challenging that picture of the world?
Absolutely. It is easier than ever to create echo chambers for ourselves, and we're all guilty of it to an extent, myself included. Back in the olden days when you had, everybody got the same edition of the newspaper and you all sat down and watched Walter Cronkite at the end of the day, that was the news. But now, of course, we can, depending on your political preference, watch a news network that's going to more closely align with that, listen to a talk radio program that's going to align with that, follow on Facebook and Twitter accounts that align and echo your positions. And again, like Stephen said, they are watching, they are following, they know that you like Fox News or CNN or Rush Limbaugh or somebody else, and they will continue to show you targeted content that just, enforces your already held opinions. So yeah, it is easier than ever to create an echo chamber where our own opinions are just, pointed back in our faces, regardless of what screen we're looking at.
This sounds like a real problem for democracy to the extent that we are a democratic country, because democracy seems to rely on the idea of a well-informed voter in cases where things are decided by votes. And it sounds like we've lost common ground in terms of what counts as news or information to be trusted. Do you think the distinction between news and entertainment is basically gone at this point, that we can't really draw a distinction there?
Alex Jones. Yeah, and it's interesting. Sorry, I keep hogging all the time, but we're filming this a day after Facebook and Instagram had a huge technological problem and we're down, unreachable for about 6 hours. And I saw on Twitter, which of course where everybody had to congregate because the other sites were down, people saying, quick, let's, reignite democracy. Let's get herd immunity. Like now that these, obvious weapons of disinformation are off, let's try and get things moving back in the right direction. So it's just funny timing with all that.
But I think you can go even deeper. Was our former president was heavily featured in entertainment prior to being elected president, and you could follow that trail right back to social media and how they were micro-targeted, very specific audiences that led into that election. And entertainment and news has been blurred heavily. I mean, you could write down 3 specific issues and look at the way those are micro-targeted to each audience on especially Facebook. And yeah, the lines of being informed are totally out the window now. And like Morgan said, echo chambers. People seek out information that agrees 100% with them and their opinion. And this happens on, this great democracy. We have 2 political parties, 2 choices, I guess. But it happens on both sides. It's easy to spot and point out one side or the other, but it happens on both ends of the spectrum. And social media companies know that, and it's about making money. I mean, some of these fake news sites are making the same targeted ads for conservatives as they are liberals. And you mentioned Alex Jones. I mean, Alex Jones has made a career out of this type of information. And social media just amplified that audience. What used to be late night radio has now become clickbait.
Having lived in other countries where they have a different approach to news and information, where they regard it as a common public good and not driven by the profit margins exclusively, it's interesting to compare. In some cases, some of these countries maybe go too far in the other direction. I've lived in China where they regulate everything very carefully, of course, the internet completely. But the idea that the distinction between news and entertainment is gone is really interesting and troubling. If most people, what they see is determined by an algorithm that's designed to capture their attention and hold it, what advice can we give to people about how to get good information? We've all seen these little charts that depict media sources and whether they're biased left or right. But really a different question would be whether how to have people sent in the right direction to get good information if they're being funneled down a channel that only reinforces their pre-existing opinions and preferences. Do we have any practical advice for people about how to get good information?
I would recommend, I mean, if it's heavy on, if you're looking at information which deals with public health, and it deals with information of politics, and it deals with information of any sort of persuasion, very specifically look at that and try to determine if that's legitimate or not. At this point, if it's coming from a source or you go to a website that you have never heard of before, it's a pretty good idea that it's some sort of micro-targeted or even specific audience targeted information. And you know what P.T. Barnum famously said: "A sucker's born every minute or every second." And it amazes me what people fall for. You know, my mom and dad are both you know, closing in on 70, and the things it seems like from about 2018 2019 on, you know, my parents, who I always thought were very intelligent and very knowledgeable of the world, all of a sudden were believing things that they read on Facebook. Did you see this? Did you read this? That's not accurate. And you know, so you're, especially with that older baby boomer generation who trusted the news. They never questioned the news because they were, you know, they grew up with print publications and Walter Cronkite and Brokaw and Dan Rather and people like that, who were very credible sources of information. All of a sudden, just constantly living on social media. And that's one of the things I noticed about my dad when he retired was, you know, he was busy all the time. Now all of a sudden he is on Facebook all the time, literally all day long. And, you know, the longer you're accessing those apps, the more susceptible you are to that type of information. The echo chamber, once again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I would just add, follow the money. I think more people do need to be educated about what we've just discussed of how these sites make money. And, I think people are automatically turned off by the paywall of a traditional news site, and that's understandable. Why pay when I can go over here and get the same thing for free? But you have to understand it's not the same thing. Who and what is funding the New York Times versus who and what is funding realnewsforreal.com, and what does each party stand to gain by getting your attention? If they understand this pay-per-click model, they understand, oh, they're not in it to give me valid information. They're in it to get my attention so that they can charge more money. Whereas the New York Times doesn't care about what they can charge advertisers to an extent. They care about providing the truth and good and valid information. So I think, if more people understood this model a little bit, even just the basics of it, it would help. So yeah, and that's what I tell my students: just follow the money. And what does that party stand to gain by getting something from you?
It's very helpful to hear how this works because, like you said, there's an illusion of Facebook being free in the sense that you're not paying to participate, but what you're paying with your attention and your interest and your personal information. When you answer a survey or volunteer a comment, all of that feeds the algorithm that builds a profile of you that's sold to people who want to access you. And so that's helpful to see that the background there. There's this illusion of discovery in Facebook where you're scrolling down a news feed and you think, hey, look what I found. I found this. And of course, the reason why that's there in your feed is because of the algorithm about you. And people don't recognize or realize that this is not accidental. It's not something that you found. It's something that found you because it was sent in your direction for a reason. And so maybe people, if they can appreciate better how these things are constructed, would see through that illusion of accidental discovery. There's no accident on Facebook. There's no coincidence there.
And I think it's interesting because as someone who's had a Facebook account for about 14 years now and had to, wait to get my college email address to sign up for it, seeing the evolution of it. Steve, talking about your parents, my grandparents were the same way. They didn't get a Facebook account until Zuckerberg opened it up to everybody. So knowing what it started as, which was really just like stream of consciousness updates about what you ate for lunch and, how many exams you had that week and, uploading poorly taken party pictures, to what it is now. It is crazy to me. And that's why if you ask one of our students, no, they're not on Facebook. They probably never even had an account because by the time they came of age, it was open to everybody. And nobody wants to be on Facebook when it's your granny sharing disinformation and banana pudding recipes all day long.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm teaching CVM 410 this semester, and it's social media strategies. And we've talked about that. So I have them working with real clients, the class. So they're working with the Kentucky Folk Arts Center, at Morehead Tourism, Rollover Rolled Ice Cream. And so we sat down one day and mapped out the demographics and age of each app and the reach of each app. And very specifically, current age students and people leading into their early 30s tend to be less active on Facebook. They have a Facebook, they have a persona on Facebook, but yet it is their least favorite, least used app, and that's exactly what Morgan said. It's family, grandmother and grandpa, and then I've had students tell me straight up they get so tired of all the politics and arguing, and I'm guilty of that too. I use Instagram far more than I do Facebook because I feel like I can be more comedic on Instagram, where on Facebook easily, especially anything can be turned political so quickly. And then that market drives that, those ads drive that. Still a line from Aldous Huxley here. It's the brave new world, especially look at those key issues, politics, health, especially public health with COVID and vaccines, and very specific key issues with politics and public persuasion. And they are very specific with that on Facebook, with that demographic of baby boomers and older.
Well, this has been very informative and helpful. So I want to thank both of you, Morgan and Steve, for joining us today for this college conversation about media and money. And I hope that it seems like we're kind of at a crossroads in some ways about information and its flow. And so we're just trying to be optimistic and hopeful that people will become wise consumers and see through all the processes here and understand where that information is coming and where it goes. So thank you again for joining us. Look forward to the next edition of Call Conversations. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.